Hey, thank you again for doing this.
Oh, thank you. This is great.
Just give people a second to join here. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Auney. I'm the Assistant Dean for External Relations for Merrill College. I'm just gonna like to welcome you this evening and share a couple quick housekeeping notes. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the program, and you can do so using the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Dean Dalglish and our panelist, Amanda Bennett, will be keeping an eye on those questions. And just to note that we are recording the program and we will have it up on our YouTube channel likely by sometime tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Best. Kathy is the director of the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at Phillip Merrill College, which is approximately officially a year old. It launched last fall thanks to a grant from the Scripps Howard Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to tell you a little bit more about that, and then she will introduce our speakers for this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us tonight for what I know is going to be a really interesting discussion. So the Howard Center, as part of our mission, sponsors a series of conversations about the importance of investigative reporting in a healthy democracy. And tonight is one of those conversations. The mission of the Howard Center is to train the next generation of investigative reporters who I think you can agree we need now more than ever. So tonight, Dean Dalglish will be having a conversation with Amanda Bennett, who is an extremely accomplished journalist and investigative reporter and editor. I can't wait. So Lucy, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everyone. I think as we go through, I think the participant list is going to grow as people come in. So welcome to all of you. We are so pleased to welcome you to the Phillip Merrill College of Journalism this evening for another in a series of conversations with news leaders about investigative reporting, sponsored by the Roy Howard Center for Journalism, Investigative Journalism at Merrill College. Tonight's discussion with distinguished investigative reporter and editor Amanda Bennett is made possible by a grant to the Howard Center by the Scripps Howard Foundation. It's going to take me a minute to introduce her because Amanda Bennett has had a fascinating and varied career as a reporter, editor, book author, and executive for the U.S. government's Voice of America. I've had the pleasure of knowing Amanda for almost 20 years, and I'm so pleased that she's here with us tonight. So, to get to the introduction, after graduating from Harvard, Amanda briefly worked as a bilingual reporter in Ottawa, Canada. She then had a 23-year career at the Wall Street Journal, which included stints in Toronto, Detroit, Washington, and Atlanta. In 1982, she became the second Wall Street Journal correspondent in China. 5 years later, she shared a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting with her Wall Street Journal colleagues for her work on how public health officials mischaracterized the AIDS epidemic in order to secure more public funding and financial support. In 1998, Amanda moved to Oregon to serve as managing editor of the Oregonian. While there, she headed the creation of an investigations team, which won a Pulitzer Prize for public service. That's the big kahuna of Pulitzers. In 2001, for an investigation on the Immigration and Naturalization Service. She then became editor of the Knight Ridder-owned Lexington Herald-Leader, and in 2003, she moved to become editor of the company's flagship Philadelphia Inquirer. Amanda moved to Bloomberg News in 2006, where she created and ran a global team of investigative reporters and editors, where she capitalized on her knowledge and experience in China. Under her direction, a team of Bloomberg journalists for the first time tallied the personal assets of family members of the senior Chinese leader, Vice President Xi Jinping. The story circulated around the world, won the Polk Award for Investigative Journalism, and also resulted in severe disruption to Bloomberg's business in China. She resigned from Bloomberg in 2013. Along the way, she found time to author 6 books. In 2016, she was appointed the 29th director of Voice of America, an international broadcast and online network founded in 1942 and funded by the United States government. At the time Amanda led it, VOA produced digital TV and radio content in 47 languages. It distributed to affiliated stations around the globe. It is primarily viewed by foreign audiences, so VOA programming has an influence on public opinion abroad regarding the United States and its people. VOA's headquarters is down near the mall in Washington and overseen by the United States Agency for Global Media, an independent agency of the US government. In 2016, VOA broadcast an estimated 1,800 hours of radio and TV programming each week to approximately 236 million people worldwide, with about 1,000 employees and an annual budget of over $200 million. Last June, Amanda stepped down when the Trump administration replaced VOA's overall agency leadership with conservative filmmaker Michael Pack. Amanda is also, for our purposes, very, very importantly, a valued member of the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism's board. She and her husband, Don Graham, have been loyal financial supporters of Merrill College, particularly our Povich Center for Sports Journalism, for many years. Together, they also founded the Dream.us, which provides college scholarships to the children of undocumented immigrants. Now, we're going to begin this evening with a conversation between Amanda and me. And midway through the hour, we will go to the Q&A box on your Zoom feed, and I will go to questions posed by you. Now, don't be shy. I encourage students in particular to ask questions about subjects ranging from investigative techniques to job advice. So let's get started. Amanda, most of our audience understands, I think, what a newspaper journalist and book author do. But you were here a couple of years ago and gave a wonderful address about Voice of America. And some of our students then interned for you and ended up working for VOA. Can you take a couple of minutes and describe for everyone what Voice of America is and why you think it's important to the United States and the rest of the world?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for that overly generous introduction. Thanks very much. And I want to double down and say, please do ask a lot of questions. It tends to be my favorite part of evenings like this. And I feel so sad about not being there anymore and also the coronavirus, because I do the same thing with this group. I say, come on down and visit and hopefully you'll be able to intern, because I think that you might agree, Dalglish, that for many of those people, that was a really wonderful transformational experience, as it was for me.
They got a glimpse of journalism around the world, and it just opened their eyes.
Yeah, and I like to say that. Excuse me one second. I like to say that throughout my long career, we used to talk a lot about courageous journalism, and I have to say that I really didn't know fully the meaning of the word until I saw the people that were working for us and working in their home countries. Because what Voice of America does now, it was originally founded to broadcast behind the enemy lines during World War II. So ironically enough, its first broadcast was in German, behind the German lines, behind the Nazi lines, because they wanted to basically bring news of the war to people that had no other way of doing it. So the first lines that were ever broadcast of Voice of America were essentially said, the news may be good for us about the war, the news may be bad for us, but we're going to tell you the truth. And they did that. And that's been the motto of Voice of America ever since then, which is that we broadcast, and pardon me, it's been very recently, and I feel so strongly about it. I'm going to keep on saying we, even though it's not we anymore. So please just take that with a grain of salt. Voice of America broadcasts only to countries that have no other free press. And so I often said that, and I think it's very literally true, that in a big part of the world, let's say between a third and a half of the world, we and the BBC are the free press. That's it. That's all there is. There is no other access to a free press. All the other medias in those countries are either controlled by the government or by oligarchs. And so for giving the access to actual information is really important for a number of reasons. For one thing, in many of those countries, it's been so long since they've had a free press that VOA is also the only even suggestion that such a thing as a free press might exist. And so to 47 different countries, in more than 47 countries, I'm going to say over 60 to 65 countries, but 47 different languages, we would broadcast news of those countries from stringers in the location, news of the region, news of the world that was important to them, and most importantly, news about the United States, because almost all the news they got about the United States was funneled through one direction or the other. And we tried very, very hard to do the very best we could to be completely straightforward, to be completely accurate and completely direct. We tried to call things, as they were. We covered the wonderful things about the United States, but we also were very, very tough on the things that were not so great. Starting from back in Ferguson all the way through the recent Black Lives Matter, we tried to cover these things in ways that were accurate, and also showed what people were doing it and how it affected people in the United States. So that's why VOA was important, is that we were using something that's very important to us, which is the First Amendment, the ability to write, broadcast, talk freely about what's going on, to write accurately going on, and we exported it to the world. We exported that American value to the world. And so when people say that Voice of America represent American values, I'm saying we represent American values that we all cherish and live by. And most importantly, the First Amendment, which I think all of us can agree is more important than ever right now.
Wonderful. I did a little bit of research and tried to figure out what changed at Voice of America while you were there under your leadership. And I discovered that VOA's online audience grew by nearly 109 million people to 280 million people a week. VOA refocused on its core mission of bringing objective news and information to those without a free press, telling America's story and explaining America's government and policies to the world. And in addition, the agency adopted a new tagline called "A Free Press Matters." You opened a Silicon Valley bureau to expand technology reporting. You launched an investigative journalism unit and fact-checking team. You established VOA's first ever press freedom beat, created a dedicated blog and a website for international students, launched new programming, including new refugee and women-focused television and radio shows, and you introduced bridge editors across the agency to help foster content sharing. These are really amazing accomplishments that obviously transformed that agency. But if you had to, come up with one thing, what do you consider to be the most important thing that happened at VOA while you were there?
Gosh, there's a lot of things that I'm gonna fudge it and say too. The one that doesn't sound very sexy was actually the one that was the most important, because when I got there, VOA was 47 different newsrooms, and it was wonderful to take people around and walk them around the building and say, you want to go to Indonesia? Do you want to go to Myanmar? Do you want to go to Korea? And they were all separate newsrooms, but that was an enormous amount of journalism power. Enormous amount of journalism power around the world, and they weren't talking to each other. And so it took a while to figure out how to do it. The bridge editors were people that would go from service to service, from language to language, and try and get people to figure out how to use things together. And that meant that we could do things globally, like looking at China's Bridge and Belt initiative by putting people in Africa and in China and in Europe and putting them all together and reporting there. So I think that was phenomenally important, because it took, mean, there's 1,000 people there, but those are just the federal employees. There's probably close to 1,800 journalists, which is one of the largest, global news reporting forces in the world. And to have them not able to use each other as resources was really a tremendous waste. And when people started to know their colleagues and realize how smart and accomplished they were, that they could turn to somebody in the Thai service, which has 10 people, could turn to somebody in the Hausa service, which had 30 people, and say, do you know how to do this or that? It just was really, energizing. It was really wonderful to watch people talk to each other. But then the other thing I think was we started thinking about what was VOA's original mission. It was to bring news and information to people who had no other access to it. It's hard to remember that people, behind the Nazi lines in Germany had no access to any other information. And so we thought, where in the world is that? And we thought refugee camps. The camp-based refugees were completely cut off from the world. And so we actually launched the first ever Rohingya language broadcasts into the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, right on the border of Myanmar. I know you remember the coverage of those Rohingya that were driven out of their homes. It was just terrible. I went there with Greta Van Susteren and spent time in the camps to figure out if they actually wanted news information. They're all like, are you kidding? We want to know what's going on. What's happening to Myanmar? What's happening to our people back home? What's happening in Bangladesh? Do the Americans care about us? Do they think about us? So we launched an hour-a-day radio program in the Rohingya language into the camp. And then just shortly after I left, a very similar project that is in the largest refugee camp in Africa was launched in the let's see, I'm trying to remember which language. It wasn't Swahili. It was probably in Somali. It was in the Somali language. That's because most of the refugee camps there most of the refugees come from Somalia. So we had launched two major refugee oriented, and my plan had been to expand that, and so also with a big focus on women, because if you want to talk about who's disenfranchised around the world, we really wanted to focus on bringing out the voices of women around the world. And this would just be an example of that, but based on an idea that we found in locked away in a little corner of VOA, the same thing, like people weren't talking to each other, but there's somebody who had this dream of creating a women-based news show, not a fashion show, not a women's health, not a family thing. We had lots of those things there. They wanted a women-based news and information show, and we launched what they called Our Voices, which was anchored by 4 or 3, depending on the time, African women journalists from different parts of Africa who did an hour-long program every week all over Africa. And if you want to see something electric for the women of Africa, to see these accomplished women journalists hosting their own show and taking on really important issues, that was really transformational. It gives you goosebumps thinking about it.
Oh. Well, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. And you've been to Merrill College a couple of times. You're serving on our Howard Center board. And you know that the Howard Center's faculty and director, Kathy Best, are trying to prepare a new generation of investigative journalists. And they are learning investigative techniques using public records, live sources, archives, data, video, photos, Zoom, largely by Zoom right now. But as an editor, what qualities do you look for when you're hiring an investigative reporter?
It's interesting because after leaving VOA, I've been out for about 3 months, and so one of the things I'm focusing on is local journalism, because the local journalism is really vanishing across the country rapidly. And my experience at Voice of America showed me exactly what happens to a country where the local journalism is not robust. And so I think it's really important that we do that. So I'm having a lot of contact with people who are doing investigative journalism at a very local level. So I think my answer today is different than it would have been 6 months ago, because I'll say now that one thing, and I remember this from my own career, that I wonder if it's maybe possible that students aren't getting the opportunity to do that. And that is the really small, hard stories that you just go out and do, and you learn a beat at a very granular level. And from that gets developed your investigative stories. I think a lot of students nowadays have, I think, what I would jokingly call the Woodward-Bernstein complex, which is, you got to come in big and do something big and have a big idea and have a team and have a lot of work and do a 15-part series and things like that. When in fact, I think right now, some of the investigative work that needs to be done is actually at a much smaller level that involves really paying attention to what's going on in your community and doing the things that are going on. And I'll give you a really good example of that. You remember the whole stories about the post office and what was going on with the changes in the post office? That story was initially broken by an intern at the Philadelphia Inquirer who was simply going to answer a question from the neighborhood, which is, why are my Social Security checks getting to me so late? Why is my mail coming so late? So they poked around the post office and found that story. Well, covering a small beat is where you get your stories. And if you don't get the experience of doing that, you're going to always be a little bit ungrounded. And so I'm going to give you that answer now, which I think is a little bit different than before, although it certainly is the way I and every investigative journalist of my era started.
Yeah, certainly that's the way it was when I got started. It was interesting to me how much time we spend trying to persuade our students that local news is a very, very good option, particularly the ones who grow up in big cities, because they're used to, if they see a newspaper, it's the Philadelphia Inquirer, it's the Washington Post, it's the New York Times, and they don't often get exposed to some of that local journalism. But you and I served together a number of years ago on the board of the what was then the American Society of News Editors. And at that time, we were watching traditional newspapers lose revenue, cut staff, and cut back on investigations. And it's really gotten worse. So let's start for a moment and talk about what happens when a local newsroom, like the newsrooms you led in Portland and Lexington and Philadelphia, are not able to cover their communities adequately.
Well, and I was just listening to a talk about that, which is, and so I'll do this with the garbled facts, but the fact is when local journalism goes away, apparently voting goes down, pollution goes up, budgetary discipline goes down. There's a whole long list of things, of metrics about a community that you can directly trace to not having a local news organization. And just having come back from like spending some time with a half dozen of these kind of very small, these micro news organizations that are springing up around the country, I would have to say, and I ended a panel that I led yesterday, and I said, when I grew up, I want to be like you guys. It was so exciting and so inspiring to see these really small organizations get in deeply in their community and deliver news and information those communities need and make an impact in their communities. I have to say that if I were going to be doing something right now, that's where I'd go right now, is to something, either to the Voice of America where you could do some global stuff, or to the very small and very local organizations where you can really have an impact.
So describe some of those local organizations. Who started them? How do they operate? What do they cover? How are they funded?
So there's a ton of them out there. I can give you a couple of names, but you can find them easily enough. ProPublica has a local network that they've strung together. Help to give kind of national level type of help to these smaller organizations that are going to be doing this. And then there's the American Journalism Project, which also is stringing together a network of people across the country to give them the help in doing the business plans, doing the figuring out how to get philanthropy to fund them, figuring out how to get to the local people to fund them, that kind of thing, to do business. So what somebody said at the end of the thing I moderated yesterday was that I said, what would you tell a young journalist? Because I recounted the depressing fact that somebody came to me last week and she wanted to start and go to journalism school. And she said, I've been asking people what to do. And she said, I talked to a whole bunch of journalists about what's their advice. And I said, well, what was their advice to you? And she said, choose another profession. And I said, that was terrible. And I said that to this group of people that were running these small things, and they said, what older journalists don't realize now is the paradigm has shifted, that there is now an infrastructure, a community, a body of people, a relatively robust funding stream. It's not enough to make it over, but there's a thought about things, and that this place right now has become much more robust. And if people were starting out, you used to tell people go to a small town paper and work your way up to the metro. This is where would be a good place to go. And I have to say, I agree with it, because I think it gives you that feeling of how much the news that you do touches people. I mean, I went directly from the Wall Street Journal, which was a big, national level, international level organization. It was read by all the most important movers and shakers, to the Oregonian, where it was in a relatively small community. And the level of engagement, the level of people who cared about what I was doing, who reached out to me. I mean, we would do stories about a river in Oregon and get 1,200 letters. So people cared. It was a really interesting thing. It was actually in some ways so rewarding to be locally in a place where you realize what you do really matters.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks. Well, I'm going to move my computer here and invite people to start asking questions. Kai Dambach asks, greetings from the German version of Voice of America, Deutsche Welle. Do you think Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is similar to VOA? And I know there are certain things. Do you want to could you just describe the relationship?
Sure. There's Voice of America, which is a part of the federal government. It's funded by the federal government, although it's legally separate and independent of the federal government. That's one type of broadcast. There's also a group of other broadcasts that are what are called grantees. The federal government gives them a grant of money to operate, and Radio Free Europe is one of those grantees. Radio Free Europe is similar, but it's not identical. And Kai, are you working for Deutsche Welle here in Washington? Because I am very, very fond of the Washington bureau chief of Deutsche Welle, and I think her energy and her values and her covering of the United States is actually really model coverage.
Yes, I think I've met her. Yes.
Inez Pohl?
Oh yes, sorry about that. I am actually in Bonn, Germany right now.
Whoa.
Oh, okay, well, there you go.
Yes,
well, I'm glad.
in the morning.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of late there, isn't it?
Cool as can be. Welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I usually work overnight shifts. Not a big deal.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I've been in your building. So, yeah. No, Deutsche Welle and BBC and the Canadian broadcasting and Australian broadcasting and Japan broadcasting, all the free world broadcasters have banded together as a group, and we all kind of look at the group that has the same values and the same principles. We're not identical, but we basically think of ourselves as the free world's free press, and France Media Monde as well. So those groups, and that's the remaining free world public broadcasters. So yeah, no, it's not identical. I think you'd find that we have similar values, and Radio Free Europe is a little bit different in the sense that they were originally set up to be what you would call a surrogate broadcaster. They were set up to be a local TV, radio, news broadcaster in those countries, whereas Voice of America was founded to both come from the United States originally and give news to the United States, and kind of looks at news and I think of it as kind of like the Voice of America is the front page and the foreign page, and the Radio Free Europe and all the other Radio Frees are kind of the metro section. They're really where the rubber hits the road, because they're covering local news side by side with anybody who's in those countries. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And those of you folks who are on the call from our faculty know that Professor Kevin Close on our faculty and the former dean actually ran Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty twice during his career.
Yes, he did.
It's quite an operation based in Prague. That's an amazing facility that they have there.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Please continue to send in questions. But I have another one for you, Amanda. You know, we're always trying to figure out, when we have faculty meetings, we talk about how we want to be teaching our students about where journalism is going to be 5 years from now. We don't want to know, you know, what they need to know right now, but we're always trying to anticipate what they're going to need in 5 years and in 10 years. And we've obviously, you know, gone very digital, and we're trying to use as much data as we can. But what would you recommend would be a good skills or curriculum for a student interested in investigative journalism to take at Merrill College or any journalism school?
Well, you know, I think things that you talked about, one thing you do see now is when we brought in new people, they really had to have a bunch of different skills. I didn't have to have anywhere near the level of skills. You had to be able to write very clearly. Anybody that thinks that, you know, doing the being a good camera person, doing a good video thing would substitute for writing, that's just wrong. You had to be able to write very clearly, very distinctly. You had to have digital skills. You had to have, you know, production skills for all of us, because so many things, if you're now doing the reporting, and in so many things it's so fast going that you're going to have to be cutting, and you're going to have to be dealing with your own stories. You're going to have to be able to post them or broadcast them or figure out how to put together a small show. I mean, I was watching people, and you may not be going to places that have a lot of visual things, but I would say that visual and audio is definitely where the entire industry is going. I mean, some parts of our operations are, you know, like 80% video. You know, a lot of the social media stuff is very video based. So, I mean, I was watching somebody go into a big news event, basically take a whole bunch of stuff with the camera, turn around and put a little tripod out, do the stand up, sit down at his phone, and on the phone, clip it all together and build a absolutely credible looking, you know, top of the hour news broadcast right from his phone in about half an hour. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think people are going to have to be doing, because even if you're not doing television, you're going to be doing things like that for social media. You're going to have to be doing things that are not just putting video up on social media, but they're produced. They've got a story to them. They've got a message to them. They've got something that you know, gets to people. So both the technical skills, and also the other thing that's incredibly important if you want to be a really good journalist and a good investigative journalist is a sense of storytelling. Mm-hmm. So I'd go take a lot of 19th century, you know, English literature that is the ones that are filled, like Dickens, that are filled with wonderful, wonderful stories, and learn how to construct a story. Because again, if you can come back with all the video footage and say, here it is, that's great. But it's the story that even if it's a 15-second story, mm-hmm. You've got to be able to understand what the narrative arc is and how you capture it, and how, not just in storytelling, but how that you become, how you are truthful and accurate in your storytelling. You can wonderfully do storytelling if you fudge details along the way, or, you know, have things that are too good to be true. But you've also got to be able to say, I'm going to tell the best possible story with what the real actual material is in front of me.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about college and see where this part of the conversation goes. You and your husband have been very active in trying to help dreamers go to college. And can you just talk for a minute about why that's so important to you, that those young people have access to education?
Well, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the videos. There was a wonderful short movie, and it took the lives of some students that competed in a robotics contest against some Ivy League students. And one of them was a group of dreamers, the other was the Ivy League students, and the dreamers won. And then it followed those people through for their lives, you know, for the next couple of years. And in 5 or 6 years, the students from the Ivy League schools had graduated. They were working as engineers, they were working as coders, they were in Silicon Valley. And without exception, the dreamers were all working in custodial jobs, or, you know, working in agriculture, because they could not get a college education. They couldn't get a foothold, and they partly because of their status, weren't allowed to work anyplace. And so it's a difference between a productive, fulfilled, useful life that uses the skills and brain powers of the person and not being able to do so. So a lot of the students we were originally funding were coming to us. One of the first students that we had, who's now graduated, she's working, she was 28 years old. She had been trying to do his college education one semester at a time, and she scraped together a semester of money and did a semester, and then 2 years would go by and she scraped together another semester worth of money and do it. So she was 28 and hadn't really gotten past her first year of college. And when she got into school, it was like somebody just turned a light bulb on for her. She was went boom, straight forward. So it's really important. And so value the opportunities you got, guys. You guys have an incredible value opportunity. And by the way, I think you're all journalism students. So if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna be super disappointed.
Yeah, it's same here. I'm looking at the list here. I see we have some alumni on the line.
So we have a question that was sent in by email. I'll pose here so I don't retype it. Amanda, what would you tell journalists getting ready to cover election night, and what have you learned about election coverage from covering them around the world that would apply to the US this year?
Great question.
It's a wonderful question, and one of the things I've been really concerned about is how good a job we as journalists are doing in reflecting the actual true expectations. And I do think it's one of the issues that where journalism has kind of gone to exposing the problems, but doesn't really yet have a good method of kind of helping look at the solution. So I want to know, what are journalists doing at big papers or small papers to set the expectation that this year it may not be election night, it may be election week, and to lay out for people that expectation that this is not going to be an abnormal thing. I mean, there's a lot of reporting about the fear that it's, when there's nothing called an election night, that everybody's going to, revolt and there's going to be blood in the streets and things. But journalists, I think, have a responsibility to be going out and looking at the infrastructure, that how the votes are counted, how they come in, what's going to be happening in your community, and actually showing people what they're going to expect as they go to vote, and then as they learn about the vote. We're all so used to, Wolf Blitzer going, and here's the vote. I think, what I'd like to see is giving an expectation that Wolf Blitzer is going to say, well, that's all for tonight, guys. We'll back for day 2 of election coverage tomorrow, so because that may be what's going to be happening. Yeah. But I don't see a lot of great coverage of how that's likely to be. There's a lot of fear about it that I'm reading about, but not a lot of action on it.
When this happened in 2000, and that night seems the Bush-Gore election 20 years ago, and it seems like just yesterday, that was a shock, and nobody really knew it. We were just doing things on the fly to cover that election. Now we have some lead up time. We know it's going to be in certain places very, very uncertain. And I think you're right. It's very important to be prepared for that. And I think we're trying to teach our students who all, election night at Merrill College every 4 years is sort of the highlight of the career for many of our students. And we're trying to teach them this is going to be different. It's going to be very, very different. But I'd like to go.
I'm talking about 2 things. I'm talking about getting a lot of planning and thinking about how we're going to be covering the elections. But I'm even talking about between now and the election. When I go back to when I talked about at the beginning, the idea of the granular work, I would love to see, in the local newspapers I follow, somebody who's going out to the various election commissions to say, okay, are you prepared? How long is it going to take you to count? What are the problems you're going to be facing? And to really put it out there that this is what's going to be happening, and it's real. It's not a rumor. This is what's really happening. So I'm not seeing a lot of that granularity in coverage. I really wish I did.
Yeah. I'm going to go to a question from Rosemary Osman, one of our very loyal alums from, I think, Bergen County, or up in New Jersey. But Rosemary says, I saw there was a congressional hearing last week where you voiced your concerns about the leadership changes at VOA. What do you think the future holds for Voice of America in the near and long term?
So let me talk about what I talked about at the hearing. And other people at the hearing voiced their concerns about the leadership going forward. I didn't, because Voice of America is designed. It's designed to go across administrations. It's designed to operate exactly the same in one administration as the next. That's the way it should be operating. My concern was anything that's happening that threatens the independence of Voice of America from the political system. That's my concern about it, because the thing that Voice of America has is its independence from the federal government, and that's not just a talking point. It under my watch and under the previous 30 years at least that I know of. I know Voice of America directors going back into the 80s. That actually was absolutely true. You were independent from the federal government, even though the money came from them. So that is absolutely an existential thing for Voice of America that needs to be separate, because the difference between government-funded independent news and propaganda is who's running the news organization. Is it going to be a news organization that's run for the benefit of the party in power? Or is it going to be a news organization that, without fear or favor, covers both parties in power equally aggressively and equally sincerely? And that's my concern, is anything that is going to cause a separation in that, to cause that separation to be threatened, is my concern going forward. And I think as you probably saw if you were watching the hearing, that's a concern that was shared bipartisanly. It was one of the few bipartisan events I've seen in the last little while. And I actually felt really good about it, because the people in the House Foreign Affairs Committee that were there, both Republicans and Democrats, were very much aligned on that idea that this international broadcasting, the First Amendment, the free press, the separation of the news from the government was a really important thing. So I felt good about that part of it.
And so you never had any pushback from the government while you were directing Voice of America?
Oh, sure we did. I mean, but when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I got pushback from companies. I got called in by companies, get chewed out. When I was at the Oregonian, I got pushback from local leaders. I mean, everybody gets pushback. Nobody comes in and says, gee, would you mind please writing a really critical story about me? You get pushback everywhere. So we got lots of pushback. The difference was what we could do about it. I mean, I'll give you one example. I'll mush the details a bit, but there was a country where we were going to be sending a journalist in from outside to report on something important, and I got a note from a representative of the ambassador who said, "Don't send that person in here. That person's not going to be acceptable to the host government. That person, the host government doesn't like that person. It doesn't like that person's politics." And I sent back a note, dear representative of the ambassador, thank you very much for your concern. That's my decision, not yours. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And they were like, they got the letter back and said, "What are you talking about? I'm the representative of the U.S. government in this country." I said, "That's right. And I'm the director of Voice of America. And we got two different jobs. You got one job, I got another job." And I sent the person in I wanted to send in.
Oh.
So the difference is who's got the authority.
Yeah.
It's not that there's no pushback. I mean, I can't imagine, for those of you who are studying journalism right now, I can't imagine you're ever going to be in a situation where there's no pushback. I mean, I can remember in Pennsylvania when I was the editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, this is the way you'd answer the phone from Ed Rendell, who was governor at the time. You pulled up because it's like, "Oh my God, I can't have it too close to my ear because he's yelling so loud." And that's just the way it was.
Yeah. Well, I see that we have alumni and friends calling from, I can tell from looking at the list that you're in California, you're in Germany, you're in New York, you're in New Jersey, and I would encourage you to start lighting things up with some questions. But I want to talk to you for just a minute, Amanda, about the Howard Center and the work that the Scripps Howard Foundation put in a number of years ago. They were trying to figure out how to handle what were the biggest societal problems that they might be able to address. and how might they go about doing it while supporting education. And they came up with this idea of creating a college program where you could learn investigative journalism skills. And as you know, we've had some projects that have really had pretty remarkable success. They've been picked up all over the globe, actually. But do you have any ideas for stories you think we should pursue, and partners that you think we know about ProPublica, but we've also just received a grant from Scripps Howard Foundation to fund some of our graduates and pay for half of their salary for the first year that they're employed if they go to work for a nonprofit newsroom. And we're trying to identify the nonprofit newsrooms where they can get some experience. Do you have any suggestions for how we should go about finding people?
Oh gosh, you know, we probably should sit down after this, because as I said, there's an infrastructure now kind of building out there, and they're linked together by some organizations. The two I know the best are ProPublica and the American Journalism Project, and also, you know, the Lenfest Foundation, which right now is working on the Philadelphia ecosystem, you know, with the
right,
you know, so there's a number of places like that around the country. I think there's a much better availability of such opportunities. And, you know, I can't let this moment go by without a shout out to the last, I'm sure you've had many wonderful parts since then, but the last project I looked at when we were there last in person, which was your wonderful Heat series, which I just—
Code Red, yeah.
Yeah, Code Red. It was just an amazing thing because it had so much creativity and so much, you know, working against odds and so much granularity. I love the word granularity, like getting right down in here, talking people into putting these devices in their houses. It was a wonderful piece, a very important piece, and it just made me want to go out there and plant trees in Baltimore.
You know, and you know, I'm going to put in a plug for our students and our faculty. That project won 6 national professional awards. They weren't student awards. They won the News Leaders Association and the National Press Foundation and the Scripps Howard Awards, and we're incredibly proud of those folks. I've got a question from my associate dean. You know Rafael Lorente, and I know where this is coming from. We're having some conversations in our Capital News Service newsrooms. That's our publishing arm. And many young journalists today are struggling with their ability to participate in democracy, such as participating in a protest. And the traditional norms of journalism that call for quote unquote objectivity, like you and I, in our generation, we would never have tried to cover a protest while also marching in it. How do you think young journalists should balance these two conflicting desires right now?
I would say that young journalists need to be really tough with themselves and ask them what they really want to be in their lives, because there's 2 kinds of ways you can change the world, and there were when you and I were starting out. I mean, there's many different ways you can become doctors, surgeons, things like that, but you know, you can become a journalist or you can become an activist, and both of them are really respectable, inspiring pathways to go. But if journalism goes the way I'm afraid it's going, where people become passionate about only one side of the issue and decide that that's the side of the issue they want to support and push, and that's the side of the issue that's right or true, I fear that we are going to lead ourselves into the type of polarization that I saw in the countries that we broadcast to in the Voice of America, and it was not pretty. It was not a pretty sight. The thing that saves our democracy was the sense that there was some middle place that people could talk and that they could believe and they could understand each other and they could believe each other, and that even if there were really strong disagreements about various things, that you could in fact find a way to find what a fact is in any case. So I do think that if you want to go and protest, you want to become part of a movement, you want to, you know, advocate for a particular point of view or a particular thing, no matter how righteous you think that cause is, you need to figure out what you want to do it, what way you want to do it. Do you want to do it through journalism, or do you want to do it through activism? Either choice is valid, but I don't think you can put them together.
Thanks. Kai Dombach has asked another question, and I'm going to ask him, can somebody, Katie, can you unmute him? Because I'm not sure I understand the question. How can I properly address a controversial opinion in a piece? I will say it's not political. Kai, can you give us a little bit more?
Yes, I absolutely can. So the thing is, so I'm an anime fan, and I've grown up being an anime fan, so on and so forth. And one thing that you learn as an anime fan, if you're one for a long enough period of time, you find out that in Japan, it is perfectly legal to sell, buy, produce drawn child pornography. And if you go to like any comic store or any comic market or festival in Japan, you can find it fairly easily. So the thing is, what I was trying to ask is, I've been talking with some people who are saying this isn't such a big deal. Like, whereas if I were to say that in the US, like outside of like anime world, a lot of people would go, that's disgusting, that's horrible, how dare you even think that? At least that's just how it feels, that's how it's perceived. So and I've been working on a story about this for quite some time now, and the reason that I haven't published it yet or is just because I'm very nervous about the potential backlash that it could receive. Now, I've talked with some people who have bought this, and they have never done anything, but I'm just curious, how do I address like this side of the debate?
Wow. It's a very interesting question. I think, honestly, it's an incredibly valuable story to do, because I'm not sure that, my kids were all anime fans. I had no idea that was a part of the scene in Japan. So I don't know. It just depends on how your story is being constructed. If your story is about the fact that child porn is considered perfectly normal and perfectly legal in the anime world in Japan, and you're going to talk to people who say that, and you're going to, to me, that's an incredibly valuable thing. It's kind of like, if you think about the analog, people have done stories about the violent opposition to homosexuality in other parts of the world. When you're talking about that, you're talking about things that people believe rather fervently, but you're also saying, let's take an outside look at it and see what's really going on. I'm not clear how you're planning on writing the story, but I certainly think that a story that addresses that topic and talks about it, kind of in a very factual and straightforward way, I think it's interesting. I don't think what you're thinking about saying is saying they do child porn in Japan and anime and we all think it's great. I think you're saying this is something that's happening, and let's talk about how that's happening. I think it's an incredibly valuable piece of information.
Thanks.
Right. Now, I just want to say, this is not a massive part of the anime culture. I just want to make that perfectly clear.
Yeah.
Like, it's absolutely not.
Yeah, but it's a part of it.
Yes, it is a part.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got one last question because we're almost out of time. But so, Amanda, you've had an incredible career as a reporter, an editor, government agency head, an author. What's next?
Oh gosh, I'm going to do a lot of yoga for a while. No, honestly, the thing that I was so inspired by Voice of America. It's probably one of the most inspirational things I ever did to see, and what it showed me is what happens to a culture that does not, what happens to a society that does not have a free press. That is weird that this big international news organization has really reignited my interest in very local news, because I don't want to see us ending up the way those countries we were broadcasting to ended up. And I was able to see just what a difference objective, truthful news meant. And that also, I understand there's a lot of young people out here that want to, you know, become an advocate for a certain point of view. It also made me really, really clear about the importance of news that people could trust, that they were telling things that were actually true and weren't trying to push a point of view, because they had lots of things in front of them that pushed a point of view. So I feel very strongly about that, and I think local news is where I'm going to start looking next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next Howard Center board meeting, and God willing, as we'll actually be back on campus.
I hope so, and I hope the next gathering we can have is in person, because I love seeing people and love talking to them directly. So thank you.
All right, thank you, and thank you to all of our participants tonight. It was wonderful to have you. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you at the next Howard Center program.
Great.
Good night.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.